and Luke. His community contributions include service on the boards of the Pastoral Institute, YMCA, Salvation Army, and the Rotary Club of Columbus. Ryan and Newt are 2/3 of the Aaron and Clements team. Phyllis Aaron, affectionately called the boss, is the other 1/3 of the team, owner of the company, and also Ryan's mother and Newt's wife. And now, without further ado, it is my great pleasure to welcome Ryan and Newt.
Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to see you. I know many of you, and the ones I don't know, I'm looking forward to getting to know. Ryan did most of the heavy lifting on this project. I was involved in the very first portions of it, and then along the way, when we had needed a little gray hair, the way we like to say it, which sometimes I used to go look for gray hair when I was younger, and now I have the gray hair, so it makes it easier. Our clients often ask us, what makes a great project? And we always tell them the same thing. First, you gotta have a vision. Well, we had a vision here. You're gonna see the culmination of that vision right here, or at least the culmination of phase one of the vision. Number two is you gotta have a great team. And I'm gonna tell you a little bit about that team. Number three is, and we've got some team members here that help represent that, you gotta have some money. You can't do anything without money. And number four is, and this is one I added to my list. I used to just say there were 3 keys, but I've learned that something else is required, because I've seen what happens if it's not there. And that is, you gotta have courage. You gotta be willing to climb out on a limb and say, this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna find a way to pay for it, and we're gonna get it done. So we had all 4 of those things right here, in my opinion. I want to tell you a little bit about the team, and that's the thing probably that impressed me the most about this project, is the team. Before I start that, I do want to mention, Elizabeth, that we moved a few things, but we tapered into it. We moved a boat first. A big boat is about 200 feet long and 75 feet wide, but we participated in the moving of the ship at Port Columbus. And that was quite an interesting experience. It's where we learned that many house movers, not all of them, Al Davis was an exception to that, but many of them don't have any teeth. And they're real characters, real characters. We followed that up with moving the World War II street down at the Infantry Museum, which was not a long move, but it was a very complicated move. So this was our 3rd moving project. We're not quite as experienced as Historic Columbus, but we're there. First, money. We had to have money. Private donors. The owner did a great job of listing the support of private donors. And then you also have to have money in another sense. Private donors often make pledges over several years, but we have to be able to build not over several years. We have to build as soon as we can. So we have to have financing, and Synovus was a very important part of our team. Nancy Strickland's here today to help with the cash flow, and they continue to be a part of the money picture and the whole thing. The City of Columbus. City of Columbus was a great team member, and I'd like to welcome John House. Didn't I see John here? We're glad to see you here, sir. Thank you. The city contributed and transferred ownership of 27 acres of the site down there, and they've leased other portions of the site to be used for later phases of the work down there. They've also were a great help in the design and construction. As you will see, these are not normal. These aren't brick and mortar and steel buildings. These are old buildings. And so many of the things that had to be done had to be creatively approached to make sure we were addressing building code issues, we were addressing life safety issues, we were addressing ADA issues, access issues. The city was very cooperative in helping us work all that out. Another important team member during the, who's going to be next on here? Oh, yeah, I see him now. Just Star, how can I miss that? Well, the Sheriff's Department. The Muskogee County Sheriff's Department was a great help during the moves. You know, in Georgia, sheriffs can go across county lines, and they came to Lumpkin and escorted every move, all the way back to its final location there, and that was a wonderful, wonderful help to us. Georgia Power was a great help to us during the moves, helping coordinate if any electrical lines had to be raised temporarily. They just were a really, really big help. And then we had the folks who actually did the work. Our site design was done by French and Associates, Larry French. Our creative architectural work, they didn't have to design the buildings, but they had to help us figure out what was going to meet these building code issues and how we were going to do the foundations, which you'll see some of later, was 2WR. Alex Griggs and Tyler were here from them. Our construction was handled by Thayer Bray, with William Bray. They did an outstanding job. And as Elizabeth mentioned, I.L. Davis House Movers actually handled the moving of the houses. And they did an outstanding job as well. And of course, Aaron and Clements served on behalf of the owner to lead and direct the team during the whole process. So those team members are the only reason. You know, people often will come up to us and say, man, y'all did a great job on so-and-so or on this job or that job. And I always say the same thing. It takes a whole team. Nobody does it by themselves. And if you don't have the team working together, you just won't get there. I promise you, you won't get there nearly in as good a way. Ryan, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this. Ryan's going to tell y'all more about the actual detail of what had to be done to get us there.
All right, can you hear me? Okay. Pull it down a little bit. It was off. Okay. We're going to go back to what we know works. I'm Ryan Clements. It's very good to see all of you here. We have a lot to say, but we also have a lot to show, because really the pictures tell the story. And I've been told that I have a face for radio, so I'd rather you look up this way than look at me. Many of you know the story of Westville, but you don't know maybe where it came from or how it got there. So first I want to orient you to where we're going and how we got there. So the first illustration we have here is we had 3 different routes that were needed to get these buildings to the current site. We needed different routes for various reasons, because of limitations of height. There's a bridge in Fort Benning that we had to go under, and it actually, you'll see later, it was shorter than it needed to be for some of the buildings we had to move, and that led us, we tried to tell Fort Benning that I should have raised it up a foot, and that didn't go well. We had a route through Alabama. It crossed over and went up through 165 up to Brickyard Road and then back down 280. Both of these routes ultimately ended at 280, and then they came down South Lumpkin Road. We had a third route that came from Pine Mountain. David Lewis and his family kindly donated a house and also contributed to the project to help us get the Billingsley house moved from Pine Mountain down River Road all the way through the middle of town to the site. So we had 3 different routes that we had to navigate to get 17 structures from their existing site to the new site. For those of you who are not aware, Westville is down South Lumpkin Road. And you go down to the very end of South Lumpkin Road, and you'll see here part of the function and the motivation for Westville. It's for educating and bringing children in so they can learn about the way of life that's being forgotten. This is Westville's a place to remember history. And what's great about this location is that it's surrounded, it's really a destination. It's not just that Westville's down at the end of South Lumpkin. You have Oxbow Meadows Environmental Learning Center next door. You have the Oxbow Creek Golf Course. And then, as many of you probably know, right across the street is the National Infantry Museum and also a place to stay, the Hampton Inn. It's all there together. And part of what I want to emphasize here I tell this story often, so some of you may have heard it, is that when we think about what happened at Westville, I refer to the Infantry Museum. We were part of that project, and what was special that I remember about that project is that no matter what role we had in the National Infantry Museum project, whether we were doing meetings or spreadsheet or cleaning up the site or working on the actual project, we knew that our job was to honor the American soldier. Everything we did there was to honor the American soldier. For Westville, for us, this wasn't about moving buildings or foundations or handrails. This was about preserving the future, our heritage, our culture from the 1850s to ways of life that are disappearing. And that's what we're doing in this process. So as we moved these buildings and worked our way through that, we knew that our purpose was to preserve history. If you go to Westville's website, you'll get a glimpse of how they start you right off from the beginning. When you go there, you see living history. This is a snapshot of the blacksmith shop. And I want to now transition you into what is at Westville. This is kind of a little sterile, I'll admit, but I'll show you in a second what it turned into. This is the Westville property. At the bottom of the page here, if you can kind of follow the pointer, is South Lumpkin Road. And as you come down South Lumpkin Road to the very end, you'll see the parking lot that is built on city property. Part of the partnership with the city was their assistance in providing in a shared cost of this parking lot. That was another way that the city was able to contribute to this project. You'll start your visit here at the visitor centers where you check in. That's where you have a chance to go to the gift shop. And as you leave the gift shop, you wander down this path here. It's a nice meandering path, about 700 feet. And you leave the asphalt and the parking lot from the visitor center, and you leave to step into history. That's kind of part of the way this was developed. The village itself, you'll see here in blue the structures that are in place. There are 17 structures. In green and yellow are the next phase, which Westville is working towards now. They're planning and developing their campaign so in the community they can complete the antebellum and the frontier periods that are part of Westville's overall story. So now this is what it turned into. It looks pretty good. All right. I want to share with you for a minute some of the fun we had, and I want to call, these are challenges, but they're just, what you have to deal with when you're working on a project like this. This is the bridge I mentioned earlier, and if you've been on 280, which I know you all have, you know this bridge, and right here was about 12 inches shorter than it could have been. It needed to be higher, and that actually impacted us. We had to change the way that we did some of the deconstruction of the buildings so that we could clear that distance. Part of what we want to talk about is the just what's involved in developing a site for a project like this. It's not just simply taking a building from its current site and placing it on a raw site. We have to design for stormwater. We have to put in utilities. We have to provide for access for emergency vehicles. We have to provide ADA compliant walk paths. So it's not just as simple as let's take a house and let's move it. It's let's plan for everything involved. And part of that equation was making it took a lot of analysis. And if you've heard about the drive path that we needed to provide to comply with ADA, we had to put in a polymer to help the soil stand up to fire trucks. Okay, so this is as we have a bunch of homes, but it has to function like a commercial property. But you want that to blend and work together. I have a question here. All right, this is my mother, so I'm going to answer it. And if any of you have a question, please throw it out there. What does the polymer do? It's a soil solidifier. It just makes the soil, existing soil, more makes it harder. Okay, so you can drive on it, it doesn't deflect. Another challenge we had is that over time in Lumpkin, if you recall, or if you've been there, there's a lot of topography, and over time, soil has come down the hill and created a collection of dirt that made it so that the buildings weren't of the size they needed to be. If I explained that well enough. So we couldn't get under the buildings until we actually got to the point of having to get under the buildings. So we knew what we probably would see, but some of what we had to deal with, we couldn't really handle until we got to that point. Okay, this is a picture of the kitchen for the Kaiser House restaurant. And the reason I'm showing you this is that, believe it or not, we tried. These foundations don't meet current code. Even though they look great and they look period, they don't meet code. So what that for us turned into was an engineered foundation, which is what you need for a commercial development. And on top of that, on top of those concrete footings, you have piers, because all of these houses sit up off the ground on top of the piers that you have here. Another example that we have here is the handrail that you see there. This is another example of it looks great there, but it doesn't quite meet code. And it's just generally better for the public to have a little better way to navigate up and down steps and stairs. There's another example. And this is where this is what we had to provide to keep people safe so that you can go up and down steps and ramps the way that we have to today. And one of the final hurdles we had is that just as we were getting ready to kick off our house move down South Lumpkin Road, so this is the South Lumpkin Road path, and at the end of it is Westville. Just to the left over here is the Infantry Museum. There's a 36-inch, 48-inch force main that pumps sewage up the road, and it failed. And they had to fix that before we could do anything. So all of this that you see here is them doing that, and it doesn't look like it, then you can't get a house through there. So we had to wait for all of that to be repaired before we could move down South Lumpkin Road. Okay. This is not the first time these buildings have moved. They all arrived where they started before this project at some other point in time. Just to kind of give you an example, this is the doctor's house as it was being moved decades ago. This is the McDonald house. The biggest of the buildings, our courthouse, which is in the middle of the village, and the Singer House. Again, they were able to get those foundations in then. We couldn't do that today. Those rocks. Part of what I want to do is, you've heard about moves, maybe you've kind of logically think about what's involved, but I want to show you, we've got an example here of our first move. And I think you'll understand some of the complexity that goes along just with moving a structure from point A to point B. And while we've got this picture here, I want to show you the sheriff cars. During our project, over the course of our project, there was a change in the requirements so that we had to provide blue light escort at the front and back of every load. Before that, we could have multiple loads in one envoy, and that would have made things more efficient. But during the course of this project, that changed, and every load then had to have a blue light in the front and the back. So that really pushed out how long it took us to move the whole collection. But I love this video. What you'll see is when you get ready to move a house, you got to carry everything with you could possibly need if you have any kind of problem. And it was a true story. They had to change a flat tire on the moving truck this first move. They had to stop and change the flat tire. So you gotta have everything with you need to change a flat tire on a truck loaded with a house. So this is IL Davis, they really were great. Mr. Jackie here in front, I love watching this because you can tell this is a guy that's done this 1,000 times. And then this is rolling up 27 on our way to 280. We're able to get up to about 45 miles an hour and make the move. And that's really the easy part. Hard part is when they get to the site. You actually got to put it where it's supposed to go, within inches. You've got to back this thing in exactly where it's supposed to be. And so they made it look easy. If you have a phobia of parallel parking, you don't want to watch this. But he makes that look easy. And there are cases where there was another half of a building in place and he had to put it in next to the other half. Now, why is it even more difficult? Well, I'm going to walk you through here sort of the sequence of how this happens when you put in a house. Before you put the house into place, you've got to put in the foundations. And that, of course, creates holes that you can't drive through. So then we have to, all of these locations here are filled with wood cribbing so that we can back in over those and give an accessible way to get into the building pad. And here they are here. It was always a little bit of, you don't know what you know until you get there. And they're pulling out boards here and they have to, it's incredible to watch how they would get these buildings into place. And then as we get the buildings where they're situated, the buildings are on top of metal beams. So we have to get the beams out. Well, to get the beams out, you gotta jack the house up and pull the beams out. And then you gotta build the piers underneath the house before you drop the house down on the piers. So we did that over and over and over. We had a great team. Thayer Bray and their team and their subcontractors really were incredible in making all this work together. So that's a little bit of the process. We did that in different ways, and I'm going to show you now some of the different conditions that we had to work with. Every house was unique, as Elizabeth started. Every house move is special. In this case, every single house move literally was a different sort of project. So we're going to take a little tour through some of the Westville buildings. Okay, first on the list is where we arrived when you got to the parking lot is the Thornton House. This is the what it looked like, go back one here, in Lumpkin. And as we got it to the new property, after it made its way onto the piers, we had it actually in this case was two pieces. So this is one house that turned into two loads. So keep in mind, every time we have a house that has multiple components, we have to move each one individually, and it became its own load. So this is the process of putting the roof back on. The general comment is that the roof of every house had to come off. So we had to take the roof off of every house. Here it is being framed back into place and securing the floor between here. Yep. And there's the final product. One of the bigger houses, this is a little tough to see because the photo's not great, is the McDonald house. So it's a two-story house, a wide house with a lean-to in the back, this piece here, and as many of them have, a kitchen that was separate. So as we kind of walk this one back down, kind of get a glimpse of what it takes to prepare the building for the move into three loads. And then we get it to the new site and piece it back together. It's just a big jigsaw puzzle, it really is. There's another picture, and then the final product that we have there.
Did you use new wood for the roofs?
We had to use new wood for the roofs, yes, we did have to. Speaking of jigsaw puzzles, is the Damascus Church. First of all, this is one of the buildings that was too tall to move, even with the roof and the steeple off. It was too tall to travel without the walls being laid down. And so these walls had to be folded down. And then this is arriving at the new site after we've got the piers built underneath. Stand the walls back up. And then put that jigsaw puzzle back together, board by board, piece by piece. This is a case where every piece had to be labeled and stored in a way so that when it made it to the new site, they knew how to pull it out of a container and put it back where it's supposed to go.
Can you tell us where some of these buildings were found?
Where they originally started, I could tell you after. I don't have that information readily where I can call that out. I'm sorry. Yes, sir.
I can tell you about the Thornton house.
Okay.
It was on my daddy's farm that we owned about 5 miles south of London. And it was known as the Thornton place. And I had moved Thornton house. The Thornton house was located on my daddy's farm. We did not live there. They had owned it for many years. And it was moved to Lumpkin before Westville was there, probably 10 years before. And it cost me $500 to move.
It was a little more than 500. Yes, ma'am.
Are any of these houses built from heart of pine wood? You know about heart of pine?
Yes, ma'am. Are they built from heart pine? And the answer to that would be yes. All right. Here's the final picture of the Damascus Church. So after taking it apart, folding the walls down, moving it, and putting it back together, that's what we arrive at. The big house, the courthouse, which I know many of you have great stories on, and Mr. Singer even pointed out, that Jimmy Carter's got family members that worked in this courthouse for generations back. It took a lot of work. We had to take the roof off. We had to, in this case, you see, as the roof came off, the chimneys that are inside had to come out carefully. You have to take them out. It's not like normal demolition. It's careful demolition, if there's such a thing. And we walked the walls down. And in this case, after taking the roof and the second level off completely, then this, in the walkway in the middle, was split into two pieces. So this became two loads. And then this is at the new site after it's been put exactly where it needed to be, very carefully. And we come back up with it. This is a good point to make the comment too, that our carpenters, you can't find a regular carpenter off the street, or that's not been experienced is really the point, to do this kind of work. And the amount of work involved here meant that pretty much anybody who was skilled we were looking for, and William's team found obviously the people that could make this happen. But that was a challenge, is that you can't just, this is not everyday carpentry. This is a little different. Here's the chimneys. Again, they have to be built after everything's in place, and then you come up through the house.
Did you use the existing brick, or were you able to hold on to that?
We were not able to, the salvage of that was just too difficult. And then there's the final condition, as you see it today. The Wells house, which was the first house to move, that's the one you saw leaving in the video. And the back section here had to come off or be deconstructed. And then this is at the new site, putting all that back together. Just a lot of time and effort. And there's the final product.
Right.
Yes.
Take the Chattahoochee County Courthouse, for example. Did y'all have any information, Mr. Sam probably witnessed it, but when it was first moved to Westville from Casita all those years ago, did they follow a similar manner of dismantling it then, or was it done completely differently? Do you happen to know?
So the question is, did we follow a manner with the courthouse, with taking it apart, putting it back together? I believe the answer to that is yes. We do have some photos. We didn't put too many in here, but it appears to be a similar process. The one exception would be is I think the foundations originally came apart more. If that makes sense. The ledger beams and the beams around the perimeter of the building were put into place individually the first time, or at least when it arrived in Lumpkin. But coming up, it appears to be fairly similar. Okay, the Climax Presbyterian Church. This is another one where it would not make any kind of move without the walls coming down and the steeple coming off. And then as we get it back to the new site, we have to frame in the new steeple. And I stand corrected on this one. This one was able to be moved, and we had to take off all the boards, which ended up back on here, you see here in the final product. While I'm on this picture, I'll refer to the Kaiser House, which I didn't include specific deconstruction or reconstruction of, but this is the Kaiser House restaurant that, if you recall, where do you go if you want to eat? And I know there are plans being developed kind of around maybe how that's used, but that's the Kaiser House restaurant. The new addition to the collection is the Billingsley House, donated by David Lewis. And this was the Lewis House, as it started out in Pine Mountain at its original location. This is another one where, in all cases, the second story had to come off. Any ancillary components had to be taken off. And when we get it to the new site, we have to piece all that back together. So you can see through these pictures, it's just every day is different, every piece is different. There's not a lot of easy production. Everything takes a lot of focus and a lot of concentration. And that's the way it looks today. And the next one here is the blacksmith shop, which again is where they do some great interpretation with fire and metal and clanging and making cool things. This one was interesting because the only way to get the beams in, because it sat on a brick foundation that obviously wasn't going to make the move, we had to reframe in a perimeter to hold it all together. So it was another special case where we had to make it trip worthy so that it would survive the trip to the new site. And here it is today. It normally has a vehicle under it. I don't think that's part of the official interpretation here. The golf cart, although I think it's used frequently for trips as needed. If you need a lift there, you can ride in the golf cart. And inside here, they do very actively have a really neat program. Don't miss the blacksmith shop if you go there. They do some really neat stuff in there. We have the Singer House, as it was at the original site. And even though the roof had to come off of this one, we were able in this case to put most of that back, which was always the goal. We had a large collection of, in every case we could salvage and reuse existing material. Where we needed new material, that came from a sawmill down the street in Lumpkin. So we did our best to use as much original material as possible. And there's the final condition of the Singer House. The boot shop. as it sat in the original location. Again, we had to take off the second floor, and this is at the new location, obviously, as we're bringing up the walls. And you see here that this is original. We've got a mixture of some new wood, but mostly original wood, put together back like a jigsaw puzzle. There it is with the roof going on. Almost complete to now a final product. Couple more to mention are the doctor's office here. Doctor's office has a great story. If you don't know the Westville story behind that, it was a place where there's a mixture of Native American influence with medicine, and so it's a key piece of Westville's mission and their story. This was the original gift shop, the Randall store, where if you walked in, this is where you would have gone in originally at the previous location. This is the final version of the print shop. Final condition of the Grimes house. You have the cabinet shop. And a little bit of a general overview. So that's a pretty quick tour through a year and a half worth of construction, moving, a lot of difficulty, a lot of circumstances. I really can't say enough about the team that worked to put this together. I mean, every day was special, and their heart was in it, and I think it's obvious. We were proud to be a part of that. I'd like to thank Historic Westville for being our partner, letting us be a client to you, or being a client to us rather, and Historic Columbus for giving us the opportunity to speak today. If there are any questions, we've got a little time. I know 1 o'clock is sort of the cutoff for this. So if you've got any questions, please raise your hand.
I've been watching all these rough, tough men doing this heavy lifting and climbing ladders and underneath houses and everything. I was wondering, did you have any serious injuries during all this?
Question is, did we have any serious injuries? And you're sitting next to the guy that would know, and I don't know of any other than just very incidental scrapes. So we don't know of any.
No, we did not.
Yeah, we did not have any serious injuries, thankfully. Yes, ma'am.
Were you able to use any of the materials that you did salvage somehow, like, I don't know, a brick wall?
Stockpile, or we believe we've got some salvaged for in case it can be used in the future. Yeah, if it had a good potential for that, then obviously it was worth keeping. You have your hand here, yes, ma'am.
What was the most, the number of structures that you could move in one go?
Okay, so the question is what were the most number of structures that we could move? I mean, technically speaking, we could have moved multiple loads, but given the requirements again for the police or blue light escort and just the mechanics of it, we really just did one a day. Yeah, one per day. That was what seemed feasible. Next.
How were the interiors moved? Pews in the church, furniture, artifacts? I mean, it sounds like you've got we got to move the interior of our house, not just the house.
Yes, sir. So the question is, where did all the stuff go while you moved? And all of the furniture and et cetera. And Westville has had, and probably I believe still does have, a warehouse where that was moved out of. That was a separate process, that all of that had to be moved and then cataloged and restored or made ready to move back in. So there was a temporary warehouse right off Martin Luther King over here where things were put temporarily. Yes, ma'am.
How did you move the beautiful tall columns? I mean, obviously you put them down, but what are those beautiful columns? How did you do that?
The columns, as I recall, and William will correct me if I'm wrong, is that they came apart. And what you see was a frame around a structure. So they came apart and then were put back together. Yes, sir.
Do you still have the large safe in the courthouse?
The large safe in the courthouse moved exactly where it started, and it has not moved. We couldn't find anybody big enough to lift the safe. So it stayed exactly where it started. the large safe is still there. Yes, sir.
Oh, well, you charge me to make a move here, what you just.
What would we charge?
I would like to have a move. Everything, just like you
Whatever you did, for you, nothing. Okay, yes, sir. And for you, yes, ma'am.
I did a quick Google, the woman who brought up heart pine while I was sitting here. I didn't realize that there isn't new heart pine. It's all gotta be ancient.
There's, yeah, you don't find that unless it's reclaimed.
Yeah.
That's right.
yeah.
Tell them what heart pine is. Heart pine.
Tell them what heart pine is. Okay, it's just a old growth, center cut pine that was used in building homes of the day, and today you don't find it. But back then it was very dense, very hard. It came in wider pieces than you get. The wood today, new growth. The industry is pushes for more wood faster, so it's not as thick and dense as it was way back
It's
then.
only over in southeast Georgia, yes, they pine.
And it's only over in southeast Georgia.
Southeast Georgia, 13 counties.
It was so dense and had so much resin in it that it resisted rot, and it resisted, that's why you have still historic houses that never were painted and they never rotted. And also insects, resisted
And
insects.
that's when that long leaves that we have, so.
And it's more susceptible to fire, though, is that right?
Next question right here.
When they did the commanding general's house, we did it last time, they took the heart pine up and they numbered each piece,
Mm.
so it would go back to the exact place. Did you do that with any of
That's
these?
exactly what happened here. Every piece is, if you remember the Damascus church and the ceiling boards and the wall and all of that, every piece was individually numbered so that it could go back where it needed to go. In the back. Yeah, eventually. I mean, and I know they're working on that to add newer, bigger trees. Yes, sir.
Were there structures that were not moved, and if they were not, do you know what the plans are for those?
Okay, so are there structures yet to come or that were not moved? The answer to that is yes. There are a collection of homes, and if you remember the kind of the site plan with the blue, green, and yellow, the green and yellow shows the new development for the next phase. And Westville is actively building their program for that. So there is a plan to get those.
Contributions are welcome.
Contributions are welcome. That's right. Any more questions? And we're coming up close to 1 o'clock here.
How many visitors has this new site had? Are you talking about children?
Mhm.
someone?
Yeah, I don't know the specific numbers. I know there've been a lot of church, school groups, and it's being used for educational purposes, and we might have a number here.
We average 100 people a day, and when I left this morning, we had 125 school kids in here.
We've seen about 3,500 so far in the.
3,500 total so far. But I think interest is growing. All right, any final questions? If not, I'll hand this back over to Elizabeth.